Good evening and welcome to Seven Stories Up, Liz Lamere with Ashley Dalle, Infinite Dreams, The Life of Alan Vega. We are delighted to have you all joining us tonight at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. My name is Allison Ellis and I'm a Supervising Librarian of Programming and Outreach here at SNFL. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making programs like this evening's conversation possible. And I would like to encourage you to visit the New York Public Library's website and take a look at upcoming programs just like this one. We have an excellent lineup this season featuring new nonfiction, music, and more. And we'd love for you to join us in this space again. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Liz Lamere is the co-author of Infinite Dreams, The Life of Alan Vega. She was Vega's wife and long-term creative collaborator. After graduating from Columbia Law School, she met Alan in 1985 when she was a corporate lawyer at a major Wall Street firm and played drums in a punk band, SSNUB. For over 3 decades, she co-wrote, co-produced, and recorded numerous songs with Vega, and together they released 7 albums. Liz managed Alan Vega's art and music careers starting in the late 80s. Liz and Alan raised their son Dante in Lower Manhattan, and she coached youth sports in downtown sports leagues for over 10 years. She was appointed to and served on a community board 1 in Lower Manhattan for 16 years, and for the past 18 years she has been very active in the boxing community and was a manager of professional boxers licensed by the New York State Athletic Commission for over 7 years. She currently coaches women's sparring. As the owner of Saturn Strip Limited, the company she co-founded with Vega, Liz now spearheads the ongoing release of recordings from the Vega Vault, a vast library of unreleased albums, songs, and sound recordings. Since Vega's passing, together with Jared Arnault, she has co-produced 2 albums, Mutator and Insurrection. Lamere has also recorded and released 2 albums, Keep It Alive and One Never Knows, on In the Red Records. She has toured and performed internationally with Alan Vega and as a solo artist. Liz also oversees the Vega Archives of Fine Art and extensive writings of lyrics and poetry that Vega created until his passing in 2016. She will be in conversation tonight with Ashley Dalle. Ashley Dalle is a New York City native, writer, electronic musician, and longtime music scene veteran. In her current life, she is a supervising librarian at the Andrew High School Braille and Talking Book Library. In their spare time, she is an avid foodie and enjoys curating her record collection. And it is now with my finest pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers.
Hello.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So excited to be here in conversation with Liz.
I'm excited to be here too, and thank you guys for coming out. Really appreciate it.
So let's go ahead and get started. So we're all here tonight to celebrate Alan and Alan's life as an artist. His career has been colored by growing up in New York City and Brooklyn, by really being a native son of New York. I guess we can start with, how did his personal values, his upbringing, really color the influences that he brought to his life and his work as an artist?
Well, it's interesting because Alan always felt he was very much at heart a New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn, although his parents were Jewish immigrants who came in and settled in the Lower East Side before relocating to Brooklyn, and very family-oriented. He was raised alongside his cousins and aunts and uncles and loved to play ball, and he was very much a New Yorker. So it's interesting, and later in his career, he was more well-known in Europe.
Yes.
And he used to say, they don't even want to know me from in New York. But I think in terms of his values, that's one of the things that really struck me about him. And I think having been raised he was born in 1938, which is interesting because a lot of people thought he was 10 years younger, and he just never corrected them when they assumed that because he had a life prior to coming into Manhattan and establishing the Project of Living Artists. But backing up, as a child, he was very much into science, and he was always exploring. He built his own telescope when he was in high school and won a scholarship to Brooklyn College, where he was an astrophysics major. A lot of people don't know. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book was there was just so much about him that was just unknown and I thought would be inspiring. for people to hear. And so he started out as an astrophysics major at Brooklyn College and was discovered drawing in his Italian notebook in the cafeteria by the head of the art department, who said, "What's your major, son?" And he said, "Astrophysics." He said, "It really should be art." But his parents had dissuaded him, being, the son of immigrants and who were struggling to get ahead. They wanted him, he's going to be a doctor, he's going to be a scientist. But it's really interesting because I think his background in science and math really put him in good stead for, as he called it, I was like the research scientist in the basement. Like I could do whatever I wanted. His whole purpose was really to experiment and to discover new things. So, that's kind of the beginning. But values, yes, I think he was very informed by that family values, hardworking. First and foremost, respect for other people was really core to his being, and it's something that I noticed about him immediately when I met him.
And one of the sciences that really colored his work throughout his music, his art, was philosophy and French existentialism with Antonin Artaud.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He read, even though it wasn't part of his curriculum, but he was fascinated by the existential philosophers. So he read Camus and Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and really incorporated some of their values, the whole concept of, life is absurd, and we not believing in fate, that we have an obligation to ourselves to live authentically, and we have the freedom of choice to, in today's world it seems like we don't, but we really do, to find purpose and meaning through living authentically. And I think he carried that through his whole life. With, always, not always positive accolades, although now that's coming around. But
yeah, and we definitely should talk about that at some point in this conversation. And there is that weight of expectation as a child of immigrants too, that you are expected to do things in a certain way to guarantee yourself that upward mobility.
His dad was so upset because it was effortless. He could get great grades in science, and he had a brilliant mind for science, but it just came very easily. It's almost like he wanted to utilize that to discover, and what better way than in math and art. And he was very fortunate because two really influential teachers happened to be teaching at Brooklyn College in the late 50s when Alan was going there. So the first one was Kurt Seligman, who was a very famous Swiss surrealist, and he fantasy and these crazy figures cavorting in these dancing ritualistic scenes that were very intense. Alan was really enthralled by that, and he was able to capture some of that in his early drawings. But it's really interesting. He used to say, you learn all this when you're learning, when you're in student mode, and then you have to proceed to try to forget it, so that you can really, you internalize some of that, but you have to create your own thing, which, as we know, those of us who know, he certainly did. So he had Kurt Seligman, and then he had Ad Reinhardt, who was one of the founders of abstract expressionism. And both of these teachers really took Alan under their wing because they could see that he had this thirst for discovery, and they were very excited to be able to mentor him. And I think it really helped kind of define who he was, especially Ad Reinhardt. That concept of minimalism really hit him. Is that idea of breaking things down to the most basic elements, and if each of those elements can stand on their own and be really profound, and that's how, when you look at his music, and and even his
artwork,
his artwork, it seems very simple, but to him it was meaningful, and he always created without any conscious intention of, how am I going to monetize this? Or what is it going to be? What is it supposed to be? And what are the expectations around what it's supposed to be? He would start a piece of music or art, and he almost became the vessel, and it just channeling whatever it was that was moving through him to create, and the piece starts to kind of take on a life of its own and kind of dictate what it's going to become.
Yeah, Alan was definitely a person who created art solely and intentionally for the sake of being art itself. And that says a lot about the creation of the Project of Living Artists, which was a grant-funded artist residency in the 60s and 70s. And I guess that's what we're talking about, like how that started and just how things like that don't necessarily exist so much anymore.
Right? Not in quite the same way, but yeah, Alan graduated from Brooklyn College in 1960, and he got a job at the welfare department. And his wife, Mariette, was a Holocaust survivor. She wrote a book, Mendeley's Journey, about her experience. Her mother and her younger siblings were taken away and to Auschwitz, never to be seen again. And she escaped with her father. Her father brought her into a convent in Belgium where up until she was 12, and then he brought her to New York. But anyway, Alan married Mariette. They met in Brooklyn College, and for about 10 years, they lived a very domesticated lifestyle in a little apartment in Brooklyn, where he proceeded to like black out all the in his room. He had all the windows blacked out, and he's painting all day, and then he's melting plastics, and then he's out in the streets recording sounds and coming. And Mariette is like, she's teaching French, and she's cooking, and she's very refined.
This was the 1950s and 60s.
This is exactly. They were living that lifestyle. But Alan, he wasn't feeling fulfilled. He as an artist, and he loved her, but he had to leave. But having worked for the welfare department, he had a little, some knowledge as to funding and that sort of thing. So yeah, he helped. First, he was with the Art Workers Coalition, and they would barricade the MoMA, and their whole thesis was like, who determines what is value as an art? And these board of directors are determining like whose work is going to be, elevated enough to be shown, and it was very the antithesis of how he felt about the creative process and what it means to be an artist. And so they were a little extreme. But then he helped fund and form the Project of Living Artists, where people would just be able to come and crash. I mean, he was basically homeless and living there as the janitor. And he and Marty, that's where he met Marty Rev from Suicide. And because people would just jam, they'd just pick up things and different instruments, and just jam or create art, visual art. He was pulling in stuff off the street. So he was painting, but he was also discovering that he liked the idea of making things three-dimensional. So he had a purple painting, and as he moved around the room, he saw the light hitting the painting, and it would take on different shades of color, kind of back to Rad Reinhardt's black on black painting, right? And he took a light bulb and like stuck it on the painting. He said, okay, now I'm a sculptor. I've just gone into like 3D territory. No, but then he started going out and just pulling in things from the street. He would steal light bulbs from the subway, things that people had thrown out in the garbage. So there were a lot of old computers or TV sets, and he would just pile them up. And in walks Ivan Karp from OK Harris, big gallery at the time, discovered Andy Warhol, and he sees Alan's piles of TVs and wires and stuff on the floor, and he's like, how soon can you have a show? And I was like, show? Oh, okay, yeah, whatever, this kind of thing. After the show, Alan would throw the stuff back out into the garbage until Ivan discovered that's what he was doing and said, no, I'm going to give you a space in the basement to keep but he'd just then reconfigure, because again, the concept of, we say, oh, if only I had this, or if only I had the funding, or if only I had the resources. But it's like whatever is at hand, it's already there, and you can create something with it. And again, that kind of harkens back to the personal responsibility to find fulfillment, to find meaning.
And I guess this is a good segue to talk about how he met Marty and how their relationship formed and how that influenced the whole beginning of Suicide.
Right? No, it was really cool and kind of, I guess, kismet that Marty was playing crazy like jazz, improv, keyboards. He was using electronic as well as acoustic and that sort of thing. And Marty's whole story is really interesting too. His origin story of being a young protege of some really amazing jazz musicians.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and he stumbles into the project, and it was just like people just hung out. It was open 24/7. And Alan would be like making noise, music noise, whatever, with whoever was there. And Marty started jamming with them, and everyone else would kind of leave eventually, and it would be Marty and Alan at the end of the night. And they just really clicked and started jamming together and creating the songs that would then go on to become that first Suicide album. At first, they didn't really have songs. They would just go on. And Alan didn't consider himself a singer, but he had seen Iggy Pop perform in 1969 at the New York State Pavilion, the World Fair, and was so moved. I mean, he considered himself a visual artist, and he was very shy, very reserved. So he has said many times in interviews, the last thing that I would envision myself doing is get up on stage and be a performer. So at that point in his life, he knew that that's what he had to do. Yeah. He literally, he had to push himself beyond his comfort zone. And he lived his life that way. He constantly was looking for something that he hadn't seen or heard or experienced before. And that's how he found his personal meaning and his purpose in life.
Yeah, and a lot of Suicide's early work and their noise experience prior to that were influenced by having seen all of the news media of the Vietnam War happening as well.
War was Alan's muse for sure. I mean, from the time he was really young, there's an essay that he wrote in 6th grade talking about World War II and the fact that he was born, in 1938. He was right. He was steeped in that stuff. And for some reason, it really, because his parents, they didn't talk about the Holocaust. Because they're not going to want to traumatize the kids. But for some reason, Alan really. I mean, he had a way of doing that. He had a way of experiencing the gritty realities of life and the world and everything else without sugarcoating it, but still having a tremendous sense of hope. I mean, the thing that always surprises me is people think, oh, he's doom and gloom, and it really, for every Frankie teardrop, there was a Cherie or a Dream Baby Dream, which is he always said, I think that should be the national anthem. He had no idea that Bruce Springsteen was going to then cover it and really kind of make it a national anthem. The song is being used in so many, Alan, whether it's because he was really a sports fan, so I think it was the NFL draft, and I'm like, oh, Alan, he wasn't around at the time. He had left this realm at that point. But being, I don't know if you've seen the movie Civil War. But when Dream Baby Dream comes in at the end of that movie, it's so fucking profound. Oh, sorry. It's so profound. Sorry, people. But seriously, and it's in this movie, The Apprentice is using, I mean, a lot of, but back to Bruce Springsteen, so paraphrasing, he basically said, one of the things I loved about Alan is he really believed that what he was doing should be mainstream. It is mainstream.
Yeah.
And he used to say that to me, I like it. And that's another beautiful lesson, though. It's if you like it and it feels good to you and it feels authentic to you, how can anyone else judge and say the value of it when it's something creative?
Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't make sense. And it didn't make sense to him, and he didn't let that get in the way of his creative process. He used to joke and say, I could live in a refrigerator box on the Bowery. But that gave him, he needed to kind of tell himself that, because I think that gave him the freedom to create without, factoring in, where is this going to fit in terms of whatever.
Yeah, he was really creating without this fear of consequence or rejection. He really was just making art for art, and it was amazing.
I love when you say rejection, because he's literally dodging switchblades and axes when he went on tour with The Clash. And as Bruce said too, if you kind of matched up with the wrong thing, that's bound to happen. It was Peter Crowley, the nightlife, nightclub impresario, the guy who owned Max's Kansas City, and who knew this is a band that should not be an opening act for something that is so vastly different, because seriously, the Clash fans went absolutely wild. They could not really stand. And Alan stood there front and center. He was willing to die because he believed so strongly. We're breaking new ground here, people. Why, And then part of the confrontational thing would be, okay, you're throwing stuff at me. I'm going to break a bottle and cut up my own face. Or I'm going to, I'm crazier than you are. So there's nothing you can do that is going to scare me into taking me off this path.
Yeah, and it's really influenced generations and generations and generations of stage performance, outlandish stage performance, because of his rejection.
Well, again, there's a long
the
history.
Crowd's expectation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a history of that, though, in Antonin Artaud's Theater of Cruelty.
Absolutely,
separating the distance between the audience. The audience gets pulled into the performance. They become part of it. And that's what Suicide were doing sometimes as well, when people were just rejecting what they were doing. It's like, well, you've come in off the street and you expect us to like entertain you now. You know, forget that the Vietnam War is going on and people are starving and all the horrible things that are happening. We're just going to forget that and we're just going to sing lullabies to you. But that wasn't going to happen.
No, and it's really interesting because they're essentially the people that reprogrammed Rick Ocasek and his entire style of creating music. Like, you know,
Well, in a way, Rick-
Alan and Martin broke him, essentially.
Did they? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, in some ways, or people were always surprised because it seemed like an unlikely pairing because he was a brilliant pop, song craftsman. But he also had, Rick was amazing, an amazing person, an amazing artist, because he was able to see what other artists, because he produced a lot of other, he produced like the Bad Brains, and he could see what it was that they were doing, and he didn't try to change that, right? And he was able to polish it a little bit to make it a little bit more palatable, I guess, I don't know, without taking the rawness away.
He saw that they were making pop music not for a pop music genre.
Interesting. And that second Suicide album, and we're getting that one out soon, so
Yes.
just so you know, because that has not really fully breathed yet, and people are going to be really excited, I'm sure, because it's an amazing album. But that, you know, Rick definitely, not that he brought his thing to it, but he was able to help enhance, and because it's very different from the first album.
Oh, yeah.
And but that was not Rick trying to let's make them pop. That was very much Marty and Alan's music at the time, because again, they were kind of, I think they were hearing what was going. They were the first like punks to actually be disco punks,
Yes,
right? It was
absolutely.
like either you're punk or you're disco, and disco sucks. But you know, Marty's coming from a place where the salsa and the like. Marty has a lot of very grassroots New York.
Right. He was exposed to everything.
Everything. And, you know, so much of it is about it starts with the rhythm. Alan always said that to me. That's why, I'm a drummer. I don't play any instruments. And he's like, no, you have a sense of rhythm. That's all that matters. Because it's about placing sound in place and in time and space and movement. And, you know, and again, those very simple elements of just layering sounds was his MO, and kind of carrying that forward.
Because really, they did it first, and then Sparks went and ran and made a record with Giorgio Moroder, and that really catapulted it.
Yeah. Well,
And you can, that's true, but you can see the influence.
yeah, oh, totally.
Everywhere.
Well, I mean, throughout Europe. So you have all these young kids like Bobby Gillespie from Primal Scream.
Absolutely.
Right? He's at the show in Glasgow where an axe is thrown by Alan's head. He comes up to them as they're getting ready to. The police came and everything else, but Bobby manages to get up to Alan and that was amazing. And then he literally starts his own band, Jesus and Mary Chain.
Absolutely.
And then people that weren't actually there but had been hearing about it, you know, Soft Cell and Depeche Mode and. You know,
the entire
Zig
new
Zig Sputnik, and
the entire New Romantics movement also.
so many different genres. Yeah, they did kind of open the door to a lot of stuff. But I think philosophically too, I think the messaging really was you don't have to just follow what's come before. You can create your own thing. You know, and people are afraid of change though, I think sometimes. So it's, you know, that can be tough.
I think so, and I guess it's worth talking about, just like how much Alan really was willing to lean into the changing times and really advancing all of these new electronic music equipment and continuing to create.
Oh, he loved that. When we first went into the studio together, because when I met him, he's living at the Gramercy Park Hotel, and he would have like all these effects pedals, and they're all like jury rigged together. He had his own little system, I had no idea, and a little like 4-track recorder, and he says, I've got this whole theory of no notes. I'm going to make this music. There's going to be no notes. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? But I was fascinated. And then finally he's like, you got to come into the studio with me because there are all these like really cool effects machines. But we're not going to use them to affect like a guitar or anything else. We're going to use the machines as instruments.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And we had the best. I had been recording with my band, Snub at the time. We were going into 6-8 recording studio in the East Village, and Perkin Barnes, who was the engineer, was the coolest dude. He's like, oh, yeah, wow, man, yeah, cool. So I said, you know what, with Alan's energy and Perkin being so chill, we're going to just slide right in there. And we started And Alan's like, no, we're not. And we're like, yeah, I just got this SBX 93 and blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, I don't need to know anything about it. We're not going to open the manual. He's like, yeah, I don't even know how to use it yet. Perfect. Because we're just literally going to turn it on and start turning knobs. And we're going to do that and then record it on the tape. And then we're going to run that track through something else. We're hitting the drum, like I hit this kick drum with a stick. And let's record that. Then we're going to run that through the machine. And then crazy stuff. And Perkins like, oh, wow, man, this is so cool.
Just like, and it was so chill. Right?
And we literally, for 30 years, that was kind of the whole idea, is just go in and create sound. And then every few years or so, I'd be like, I would get Alan to go in and lay down vocals, right? We call it vocal avoidance because, he loved just creating sound. And that was like homework. Now he's got to go home, and he would write every night. I mean, he had stacks and stacks of notebooks filled with writing. I mean, that was his catharsis. He wrote and he drew faces every night. We have a ridiculous amount because they would. And Henry Rollins, when he first wanted to meet him, like 92, he's like, I know this man has notebooks. I know he does. There's nobody who writes lyrics unless they have it, right? And he did. They were stacked up everywhere. But yeah, I'm going off on a tangent here.
I don't know if that's really a tangent though. And I guess that kind of leads us back to what we were talking about earlier, which is now you're hearing suicide's music everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if they're kind of receiving their flowers posthumously now that it's become commercial.
Right. But it's funny because I wrote the first song on my second solo album, King City Ghost, and it's like, you said they'd know one day what you came to say, because he used to say that, just wait till I'm dead, right?
Right.
Because you're like Vincent van Gogh, they finally are looking at, taking a closer look at everything that he did, both as a visual artist. His visual art is also, there's a piece right here. Holy Ghost. And that, the Holy Ghost part was in, I see a sculpture from like 1983, and it had that same thing, because he literally would cannibalize his own stuff, and he was like really not precious about it, just like he would paint over canvases. I'm like, no, we can't do that, please. Yes, but starting, I mean, even before he passed, it was already starting to happen. So it was really nice that he was able to know that people were accepting his work, his solo work, his stuff with, obviously, suicide has been really mainstream. And it's funny, Bruce had said, they're thinking it should be mainstream. Well, it kind of is becoming, which is nice. And the thing that blows my mind, too, is for 30, 40 years, we've been seeing the next generation of kids. It's like they're discovering, they're discovering suicide, and they're like hugely into it. Yeah, when I go out on the electronic music scene, right? Kids are coming up to me, oh my God, suicide, da 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 da, or Alan Vega.
Everyone knows who you are. Everyone knows who
now
Alan
I'm
is.
suddenly a legend. I'm like, what? Well, I guess I paid my dues a little bit. I was out there.
You did twofold. Yeah. You're a talented musician in your own right, and then you're also preserving Alan's memory.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing. So I guess I have a little bit of a skill set where I'm semi-organized, although we were talking about that before.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. But it's been amazing because I've been allowed to, with Alan. I grew up in a very different, very structured, huge emphasis put on formal education, go to law school, do the whole Wall Street. That's a whole other trip, people, if you want to learn about what it was like in the mid-'80s on Wall Street, being a woman. And I was working for a very top firm. I mean, we represented Michael Milken, junk bond offerings, insider trading. I need to say no more. But it was.
We'll have a whole second author talk about this.
No, it was crazy. I know where the bodies are buried on that. Seriously, it was.
When does
the
your
investment
NDA
bankers
expire?
were insane, and I had grown up with two older brothers, and I knew the whole frat boy mentality. So I was able to hang in that environment. But it was pretty crazy. So I'm coming from that world, and then I'm with Alan, where there are no mistakes. No mistakes. This is like oh shit, amazing. And we're just free to whatever is happening in the moment is what is happening. It was just unbelievable that I feel very blessed that I was able to really kind of develop that side of my being and find that kind of purpose and fulfillment through, so he was an amazing life partner.
And I guess we haven't even really talked about the book. And, so when when did you decide that that you were going to start compiling for the book itself?
It wasn't a conscious intention. And again, it's interesting because everything that Alan, a lot of the stuff in the external world that Alan achieved was by people coming to him, starting with, Ivan Karp. He wasn't out there bringing his slides around. A lot of artists were, because that's what they do. That's what you're told. You have to go out there and hustle your thing. But he was so truly just focused on the act of creation, and back to the refrigerator box on the Bowery, or I'm the research scientist in the basement. No one's looking at me. I'm just in here doing my thing. And other people like me, I would pull them out and say, well, we got to make an actual album. I want people to hear this. And then he'd go into, that's a whole other thing. Hearing that man go into the vocal booth and just record vocals was like a religious experience. It was crazy and it would never be the same way. And I would be like, oh, let's do this. Can you do another take? It would be completely different. And we'd always keep the first one because he was so in the moment when he was recording, like anything else. I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, people.
Oh, we were talking about how the book actually.
Oh, so the book. So after Alan passes, it's like and he had said, he had met Jared Artaud. Jared would come over and hang out. They'd talk for hours. And he's like, this kid really gets it. And so he had said to Jared, kind of jokingly, but not really, because we had done a split single with Jared's band, The Vacant Lots. Right. And I went into the studio. Alan wasn't really going in the studio much. I went in, and in one afternoon with Perkin Barnes, we're scrolling, because I had Perkin digitizing a lot of the earlier stuff, and we were organizing the files. And I see this track. It says Nike Soldier, and it's from like 95. Now it's 2015. Right. So I'm like, okay, let's pull that up. I'm like, holy shit. And I remember, it's unbelievable. To this day, when I hear tracks, I'm like, I remember that session. Like, it takes you right back. And so we just mixed it that afternoon. Like, I just pulled all the tracks up and mixed it, brought it home. Alan's like, holy shit, where'd that come from? He didn't remember. He's like, I'm like, this is Nike Soldier. He's like, great, give it to the kids. Off they go. And the press are like, this is great, So Alan said to Jared and I at that point, when I'm gone, you guys have my blessing. There's all this, must be a ton of stuff. I'm like, Alan, you have no idea how much stuff is in the recordings, in the vault that we started calling it. Yeah. He called it the Vega Vault. He said, go into the Vega Vault and do whatever you want. I trust you. I trust you. He used to say that to me. It's like 3 people that I care about what they think about my work: Rick, you, and Henry Rollins. Other than that, fuck them. Sorry. No, I didn't mean it that way.
I like that Marty didn't make the list.
Well, yeah, but seriously though, because it was Alan's Alan's thing. Yeah, it was very much his own. And people don't realize that too. That was one of the reasons I wanted to do the book, because this is not just, that was that singer from Suicide. No. The man was, it sounds cheesy, the Renaissance man thing, but he lived and breathed creation, whatever medium it was. He went through a photography phase for a while, and he would take the most amazing photographs off the TV. He'd get static, he'd change channel, he'd do all this crazy stuff. He made his own little filters with just pieces of plastic. Just literally whatever was at hand type thing. But yeah, so back to the book. Yeah. So after he passes, Jared and I do Mutator, right? Yes. And that was an album that had come out. I remember being in the studio because it was right after Do Jang Prang and just before 2007. And we're in the studio for months and months and months, probably a year and a half or so. And then I'm not coming in as much, so he's moving on to the next thing that becomes 2007. But there's all these iterations of all these tracks that haven't evolved into 2007 yet, but are just as vital and vibrant in their own at that state. And so we put that together, and we had put together an album called Mutator. So we just did a little bit, not that much of remixing, more for Insurrection probably, but not so much. But anyway, so we released Mutator, and we were interviewed in the New York Times, and then a literary agent read it, and I was talking a little bit about Alan's background, and he said, there's a story there that hasn't been told. And he had worked with Laura Davis Channon, who's the co-writer, and she did a beautiful job researching Alan's early life and pulling quotes from the existential philosophers and Kerouac and all that. Just the way she put it all together, that was very much Laura, especially at the beginning of the book. Once I met Alan, and even before, because I knew a lot of the stories from the Clash days and all that. So from like the mid-'70s, from when Alan left Mariette on, obviously a lot was informed by me telling Laura about it and interviewing people. And I love the fact that some of it is kind of novelized and she's doing dramatizations and then it switches into where it's more just like straightforward, telling like a biography.
Yeah.
And then we weave in talking to people who created with Alan, who are also artists or people involved in the music or art industry, but whose lives touched Alan and who Alan touched their lives.
Yeah.
So it's such a beautiful, I love that. And that was all kind of Laura and I, it just kind of flowed together. So it wasn't like I sat down and I said, like, I've got to write this book. Again, it just kind of came to me, and then through Lee reaching out and saying, there's a book there, you should write it, and here's this woman who would be a great fit. Ironically, she was in a band called the Student Teachers in the 70s, and she had written, and she was a drummer. She was a 15, and I was a drummer growing up, so from the time I was about 15. And she played drums in this band, and she ends up like dating Jimmy Destry from Blondie, so the band is now getting some notoriety, and then David Bowie gets involved. He's produced. So her book was really kind of fun, because here she is like a 15-year-old kid, and she's getting some, she's on the music scene in the 70s, and so that's a fun book. And she went on to, she had a serious health issue in that she developed MS, and she's in a wheelchair, but she's an amazing woman. She did not let that in any way, shape, or form, slow her down from, pursuing her writing. She went to law school. She became a lawyer. Now she's a writer. And
Yeah, you guys lead almost like very
it's a good fit.
parallel lives.
I know, it was crazy. So it was a really good fit. Different styles in terms of writing, because she's much more of a creative writer.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people out there, especially when their creative partner or folks that they've just been working with for a long time pass, and you become like a custodian of their memory. And that's very different than what you're doing, and you're a curator of Alan's memory, and that's very different, and it's very special.
Thank you.
I think we should talk about Insurrection that just came out, because the material for that was written so long ago, and it's so prescient to like what's happening now.
It's really scary, but it's also, it doesn't surprise me, because that's how Alan was. He was somehow tapping into some kind of collective unconscious. And the themes, they're really universal, but it also kind of, to me, it says that, we've been here before, things happen in cycles, right? There's always been war. There's always been this kind of crazy power grabs by people in positions of power who don't want to let go of that power. And then it leads to, in some instances, divisiveness and fear that there are limited resources, and somehow, especially, a certain presidential candidate who seems to feel that, it's got to be a lose-win as opposed to a win-win. It's a zero-sum game, and I need to win, and you need to lose. You need to lose in order for me to win. And I think, Alan would be very disappointed by that thinking, because it was really very much about, we can all elevate each other, we can support each other, we can rise together. And again, harking back to that freedom of choice.
Yeah.
Let's not lose sight of our own personal freedom, but also to build each other up. And the whole idea of the resources are really limitless when it comes to, especially when it comes to creating. But then that carries over to all aspects of our lives.
I think so. And he was like a champion for everyone. He would always be there if you wanted to, approachable, you could talk to him.
He did not believe in ranking people, and that's the thing that I absolutely loved about him too. Like every single human being that he was with at any point, they were just as special and just as important. You could be the fucking king of, whatever, to the person who's sweeping the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And you would have just as much value, and he was very, very caring and empathetic that way.
Yeah, and it also does kind of come back to like this, like, oh yes, you could see it coming, but especially Alan is someone from New York who hasn't read the daily newspapers of New York every day. It's like, oh yeah, you could kind of see this coming. Let's write an album about it.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's, a lot of what he wrote about was informed by, he absorbed the news and the papers, and he watched documentaries all the time, and, he was fascinated by the human condition. And I think a lot of that is pulled into his writing. And that's why we hear, what is he, it's like diseases, and I'm like, holy shit. Like the pandemic. He's talking
Yeah.
about the pandemic. It's like 20 years. Yeah, but
Yeah,
pretty amazing.
Yeah, sci-fi books were a warning, not a manual to do.
I'm sorry?
I said sci-fi books were a warning, not a
Right,
manual.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess that begs the question, like, what next for the curation of Alan's memory?
Well, we're still looking at a lot of material from the recording studio sessions, and we probably have at least 2 or 3 more like conceptual whole albums. But what we'd really like to start doing is collaborating with other artists and saying, hey, people have reached out to me and said, oh, I really bemoan the fact that I never reached out to Alan, because they didn't realize he was so approachable and so generous with his thing. And you want to collaborate with Alan. We've got all these vocals in the can. We've got all these sounds, and so that's kind of the next. We're going to be doing a little bit of that. There's a lot of art that I would still love, people to continue to see. We've been really lucky because we've had really good representation with galleries in Paris and in New York, and his work has been placed in very important collections and museums, and so it's been really nice to see. So yeah, we'll continue to do that, and he really inspired me to find my own purpose, to live my authentic self. And I was like, he used to always say, you should do your own music, because we would be, when it came time to mix, I would be, oh, I want to hear your voice more. I want to hear this, and I would like to separate the sounds more. And he liked a cacophony of like crazy. Yeah. And so we would have little butt heads a little bit, and he'd be like, make your own music. You're really like, So, yeah, and I'm like, what am I going to say? But I started writing, and and listening Alan's voice in my head. I hold him with me, and his, again, if it's authentic and if it's true to you and you're feeling it and you're liking it, that's all that matters. And so I've been doing that, and it's been unbelievable. I feel really very grateful that at this stage of my life, I feel like I'm a kid. I'm just starting, I love, one never knows. I love that freedom. Seriously, the freedom of not knowing what you can't do, and feeling like there's just so much out there that we don't know, and that gives you tremendous freedom to, just be open and explore and not worry about what's going to happen next.
And I think that's a really beautiful way to honor Alan's memory.
Absolutely. I know he's cheering me on, for sure. And our son, Dante, who's amazing. Dante's my sound engineer. He's awesome. Hi, Dante. Shout out. He's like, oh. He'd probably love to go where he knows, seriously. He's in the studio himself. But.
Yeah, so I think we're actually going to take some time to turn it over to the audience for some Q&A.
Hold on, we have a microphone.
Yes, we have a microphone for you, Bob. Allison's coming.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if anything got left out of the book for whatever reason.
That's an interesting question. Anything in particular, like?
Well, I'm just wondering, because, with any story, with any book, for whatever reason, things don't get put in, they get left out because they didn't fit for some reason or whatever. So I'm wondering if there's anything that for any of those reasons might have been left out.
No, it's an interesting question. There was no conscious decision to leave out anything, but I had sleepless nights where I thought, like, is there anything I'm forgetting that I should be mentioning in the book? But it was a lot, because there was a lot of ground to cover. But no, there's nothing in particular. Maybe when it came to Alan's girlfriend that we allude to a little bit, we didn't really go into too much of a deep dive on her, because she really hurt him pretty badly. So, but other than that, no. I'm sure and that wasn't the point of the book. Wasn't so much. And then this really cool thing happened, or then da 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 da. A lot of I think rock and roll or any books, right? They, people want to hear like, what crazy thing happened. That really, for me, wasn't really what it was about. It was more about gaining some insight into who Alan was as a creative being, and some lessons that could be hopefully inspiring other people, because I know it inspired me, and just from over the years having other just really amazing human beings and artists and creatives coming up to Alan and saying, you know, how you inspired me. And I just wanted to kind of carry that forward. If that in any way influences other people to just take that leap and just create, you know, from the heart and not worry so much about. I know it's easy to say, right? But if you're trying to pay the bills as a creative, it's really hard to monetize. You have to think about monetizing it, right? It's really hard, and that's one of the things that, you know, we should be shedding some light on. In other countries, the arts are subsidized and they're really appreciated and valued in a way that in our country, it's, you know, the almighty dollar and capitalism.
And that's what we were talking about, like the individual artist grants. Now to get an NEA grant, you have to go through an organization, and there's so much bureaucracy and politics involved in that you as an artist can't just support yourself making art. You have to essentially have the patronage of some institution to get grants that previously in the 60s and 70s, like Project of Living Artists, were just state funded.
Exactly. And it's, you know, it's a whole different world also in just terms of social media. Alan never carried a cell phone. He just didn't want to. We had a sound engineer who did all the computer work. He didn't use a computer. He certainly knew very little about social media. We didn't have a social media account for Alan Vega or suicide until 2019, which is unbelievable. And as soon as we did, it's like night and day, like, because now people know where to find us, kind of thing.
Yeah, when it popped up on my suggested for you, I was like, what is this?
Really? Oh, I love it. And
Alan would have hated
but
this.
you know, it's funny, people were managing to find it before then, but it's just a whole other level. But to me, what that indicates is the pressure on creatives you have to then become your own, you know, you have to become your own media campaign, and that's a whole separate thing, at least to me, from creating.
Yeah.
And then that goes, again, it's the antithesis of what Alan was doing. You literally have to be thinking about, well, how is this going to be received, and how are we going to monetize it, where are we sliding it in, and how does it fit in the on and on and on. And you have to be kind of comparing it to all this other, I mean, we're like on information overload. We're constantly being fed so much, and how do you separate that when you're trying to create something that's coming, you know, from a very pure internal place?
How do you just create art for the sake of creating art in 2024?
Right. That's a whole other discourse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you?
We could be here for another 2 hours
Right?
about that.
Exactly.
Other questions?
He was the same age as my parents. I'm curious to know where he went to high school in Brooklyn.
Oh, I love that. New Utrecht. Yeah, baby. It was either Lafayette or his cousins went to Lafayette. He went to New Utrecht, and he loved it because there were a lot of Italian kids there. He thought they were really tough. And
Every member of my family went to New Utrecht. My parents would have been there at the same time.
nice. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, which side of Benson did he live on?
He lived in Bensonhurst, 86th Street, and I forget exactly where.
Probably
Yeah.
Utrecht.
I grew up on
Probably.
19th Avenue and 76th Street.
Get out of here. So you're right around the corner. I love it. You know, it's so funny, though, because people really, when I met Alan, I was 27 years old. I'm working on Wall Street. And I was so immediately like thunderstruck by this man. But I'm working with guys who are partners at the major firm. They're like in their mid-30s. And I'm thinking Alan is younger than these guys. It's crazy. He was 47 years old. But that just showed that like his energy and his, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. So people didn't know. And it wasn't like he was trying to hide that, but he had lived with Marriott. He had the whole domesticated
he had a whole other
thing
life
for
before this
10
one.
years. And then he comes in, he meets Marty. Marty's 10 years younger. People assume he's in his early 20s. He was like almost 40 when the first Suicide album got.
Yeah.
You would never know that, though, by looking at him, literally. I see pictures of him then. My God, he looked like he was 20.
Yeah, I don't think
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't think anyone actually knew how old
But
Alan
because
was.
he was living his authentic life. It's true. But it's true. It makes a big difference.
When you're not encumbered to capitalism, you get to age slower, I suppose. Sucks for the rest of us. Other questions? All right, well, on behalf of the New York Public Library, I want to say thank you so much to Liz for being here. This was amazing. I appreciate you coming here to talk about Alan's work, about your work, and just keeping the memory alive.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you guys for all coming out. I really appreciate it. Yeah.